Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're popping the lid off the ultimate practical toolkit for persuasion. Whether you're stepping up to a formal debate podium, pitching a huge initiative in the boardroom, or honestly just trying to win an argument at the kitchen table, the principles of rhetoric are totally universal. We're going to break down exactly how arguments are built from the ground up, how they're strategically torn down, and how you physically deliver them for maximum impact. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, the anatomy of an argument. Second, the art of the clash. Third, the mechanics of argumentation. And finally, we'll step inside a debate round. Section 1, the anatomy of an argument. To really get a grip on persuasion, you kind of have to think of arguments as the foundational building blocks of a house. The very first piece of that foundation, that's your claim. Simply put, the claim is the specific point or contention you're trying to make. It's the what of your whole argument. So if you say, hey, we should really implement this new environmental policy at the office, boom, that is your claim. But listen, a claim without any reasons to back it up, that isn't much of an argument at all, right? It's really just a naked statement floating out there. And that logically brings us to the second building block, the warrant. Warrants are the underlying reasons provided to support and justify that claim. It's the why. So you want that environmental policy because it reduces carbon emissions by 20%. That underlying reason, that because, is your warrant. And to finish out our rule of 3 here, we absolutely need the material that holds this entire foundation together. That's your proof. Also known as evidence, proof is what ultimately validates your warrant for the judge, your boss, or even your family at dinner. In formal debate, this usually comes in the form of what debaters call cards, literally quotations from published authorities, experts, or solid statistics. It's the hard data that basically says, look, don't just take my word for it, look at the verifiable facts. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is you might think you always need, thick textbooks or a mountain of published internet data to prove your point. But as our source material notes, if you use pure logic or reasoning as the basis for your proof, that's called an analytic. Pure, sound, step-by-step logic is a completely valid and, honestly, highly effective form of proof in any setting whatsoever. So the crucial point is this. While law students might literally spend an entire year of their lives studying the dizzying complexities of evidence, for our purposes, all complex proof essentially boils down to just 3 simple categories. You've got opinion from qualified experts, verifiable fact, and analytic logic. If you've got a claim, a warrant, and just one of these forms of proof, well, you've successfully built a complete argument. Section 2, the art of the clash. Let's move to this and see how it builds on everything we just discussed. Because look, making your own argument is really only half the battle. To actually win, you have to actively attack your opponent's points. If you just state your case and completely ignore theirs, you aren't really debating, you're just giving a speech in an empty room. So, let's open up the defensive playbook. There are 5 clear methods to clash. First, direct denial. They say black, you say white. Second, challenge relevance, which is basically saying their point doesn't even matter to the core issue. Third, attack the warrants. Dismantle those underlying reasons we talked about. Fourth, attack the evidence or proof. Show their data is completely flawed or unqualified. And fifth, and this is the most strategic maneuver, you turn the argument. This is where you take their claim, their warrant, or their proof and masterfully spin it to show it actually supports your advantage instead. It's a total game changer. Moving on to Section 3, the mechanics of argumentation. Making arguments in a super fast-paced round is a whole lot like being a baseball pitcher. To consistently throw a strike under that kind of pressure, you need flawless mechanics, and this brilliantly illustrates the exact 8-step mechanical checklist that top-tier nationally competitive debaters use. It's called embedded clash, and it basically guarantees a strike every single time. First, identify the argument you're actually responding to. Second, signpost. Tell the judge exactly how many responses you have. Third, give it a snappy label or tag. Fourth, explain your argument. Fifth, state the source and date of your evidence. Sixth, actually read the evidence. Seventh, explain why your argument totally beats theirs. And finally, number 8, move on. It's this incredible machine-like process for persuasive efficiency, and you can totally adapt it to keep your own everyday counterarguments perfectly organized. Finally, Section 4, inside a debate round. So let's zoom out to the physical reality of a formal policy debate. When you get into these rounds with real debaters at the podium executing rhetoric under extreme pressure, the terminology gets super intense and the pace is incredibly fast. But remember, Just as good lawyers make complex facts simple for a jury, the absolute best debaters know that no matter what fancy jargon gets thrown around, the whole shebang boils down to exactly what we just learned: claims, warrants, and evidence. Let's actually look at how a formal round kicks off. It almost always starts with the first affirmative constructive. We call that the 1AC. This is a pre-scripted 8-minute speech that outlines the affirmative's entire case. And we can exploit our rule of 3 pattern here again to make the 1AC highly memorable. It absolutely must establish the trifecta. First, significance. You have to prove there's a massive problem. Second, inherency, showing that the current status quo absolutely cannot solve this problem on its own. And third, solvency, demonstrating that the affirmative specific plan will in fact fix it. Right after that 8-minute 1AC, the chronological flow shifts gears. We move straight into a 3-minute cross-examination. But, and here's the highly strategic, super clever part, the second negative speaker is the one who actually asks the questions of the 1AC. Now, why would they do that? It's so the first negative speaker can use those 3 minutes of questioning to furiously prepare their own speech, the 1NC, which is where they will finally unleash the clash. They're literally prepping to use those 5 attack methods we just discussed to tear down the affirmative's claims. Which brings us to a final, really provocative question for anyone looking to master the art of persuasion. Will you rely entirely on excerpted debate cards provided by others, or will you actually dig into the original sources yourself to master the true nuances? Our source text makes one thing incredibly clear. There is absolutely no substitute for doing your own homework. Digging into the original literature base gives you a deep, deep understanding of the hidden meanings behind the words. I'm talking about nuances that just aren't apparent in a quick soundbite, but can literally be the deciding factor when you're deep in the clash at a tournament, or, fighting for your ideas in the boardroom. So go beyond the surface, engage directly with original material, and build an unshakable foundation for your arguments. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep structuring those arguments and keep learning.